Yeah, I think we can get started. Welcome, everyone, to our uh, semi-monthly book talk. My name is Craig Willingham. I'm the managing director for the CUNY Urban Food Policy Institute. Before we get started, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping. Rosita, if you could advance to the next slide. So we have a couple of other events coming up. If you find our events interesting and you want to attend some additional ones, on October 21st, we have a forum focusing on expanding food access, insights from the Groceries to Go program. Groceries to Go is a really interesting and groundbreaking program being run by the New York City Department of Health to provide access to healthy and affordable foods to families. And I think the findings from that research, many of you will find uh, very interesting and will be a great insight into how you can not only support that work, but perhaps do some of that work yourself. Next slide, Rosita. So with that out of the way, welcome everyone to today's Urban Food Policy Forum talk, which is on sustainable food procurement. We're thrilled to have you here for what promises to be an insightful conversation about the critical role of sustainable food procurement in shaping healthier, more equitable food systems. This book, Sustainable Food Procurement, Legal, Social, and Organizational Challenges, explores how public procurement can be a powerful tool for achieving environmental health and socioeconomic goals. Our guest speakers today have each contributed to this conversation in significant ways, drawing on their experiences in various regions. And our panel is comprised of Mark Stein, Research Associate, Salford Business School, University of Salford, Manchester, and the lead editor of the book, Sustainable Food Procurement, and author of several chapters, among which Chapter 3, Public Procurement and Local Food in Sweden, Denmark, and the UK. Urszula Ala-Karvia, doctoral researcher, Ruralia, Institute, University of Helsinki, Finland, co-author of Chapter 4, Public Meal Provision in the Baltic Sea region. Mina Mikola, Sustainable Food Systems expert and former visiting scholar at Ruralia Institute, University of Helsinki, Finland, co-author of Chapter 4, Public Meal Provisions in the Baltic Sea, and Maurizio Morani, director of Recetro, Eating City, Marseille, France, co-editor of the book Sustainable Food Procurement, and several chapters, among which Chapter 14, Paradigm Shift in Public Food Service. We'll start with brief presentations from our panelists, followed by a deeper dive into some key themes. I encourage everyone to think about the questions that may pop up in your mind during these presentations, and think about what you may want to ask during our wrap-up in the Q&A session. Now, let's begin by welcoming our first speaker, Mark Stein.
Moi moi, lähdetään taas.
Whoever that is, if you could mute your microphone, please. Let's start by welcoming our first speaker, Mark Stein, who will share his insights on why this topic is so timely and important. Mark, over to you.
Right. Thank you. Well, I'm a retired economic development officer. I worked for 22 years in a municipality in Greater Manchester called Tameside. Right, as we were. Right. So anyway, I was boosted out of the pension, and as many people were when the government changed in 2010, and there was a big cutback in local authorities, I went back to university to research sustainable food procurement. I went to Salford University in Manchester, and a couple of years ago, I completed my PhD thesis, which compared UK public catering with Denmark and Sweden. Next slide, please. So anyway, the four of us got together and decided we wanted to do a book. I'd known Maurizio for quite a lot of years, and the excellent work he's been doing with Eating City. Roberto Caranta, I think I've met a couple of years ago, and he very kindly hosted a conference. And then Dr. Yanis Polokranakis was my supervisor for my PhD, for the MPhil before that. Next slide, please. Next slide. So there's likely been increasing interest in this topic, and there hasn't been a lot of literature on what people have actually been doing. And you've had a lot of people trying to similar things in different places and not really learning from each other and from other people's successes and failures. Next slide, please. Next slide. Right, so we had quite a good conference in Turin in December 2020. Originally, it was going to be a face-to-face conference in February 2020, but then the pandemic stopped that. And it actually took us nearly 2 years to draw up the book proposal. But once we got it to Routledge, they took quite a rapid decision to accept it. And we actually submitted the manuscript 11 months later. And Routledge don't hang about. The proofs came back early December, and was actually published in February 2024. So once we had actually got the book proposal in, it all happened quite quickly. Next slide, please. So anyway, my role was to put the whole thing together. So I asked the authors to do chapters, and then I went through the chapters line by line, paragraph by paragraph, page by page. I changed some of the chapters a great deal. I agreed the changes with the authors, and I put the whole thing together, bunged it into the publisher, and then I dealt with the publisher's queries. Next slide, please. So sustainable procurement, not a simple notion at all. There's all sorts of objectives, and I've listed them there, but I'll just suffice to say that the objective of wanting local food may actually conflict with the objective of wanting organic food if you've got no organic food being produced in your region. Equally, if you're buying in lots of local meat, even local organic meat, that could send your greenhouse gas emissions through the roof. So you've got to juggle all these different possible objectives. Next slide. Anyway, one chapter which I think is appropriate to mention here because it sort of gives an overview of a comprehensive approach to sustainable procurement, as that's set out in this Italian document issued in 2020. So anyway, it's well summarized in the chapter, and it really covers all the different aspects of sustainable food procurement. Next slide. Another chapter, the one on the vending machines in Turin University, that illustrates how people in the university who wanted to make the whole process more sustainable, they actually started out with a general objective of making it more sustainable for these hundreds of vending machines scattered over an enormous city university campus. And they talked to the suppliers. They tried to find suppliers who would offer them something ambitious. They talked to the users and found out what the users wanted. Did the users actually want something more sustainable and healthier? They drew up a tender, which of course had to comply with all the legal hoops of European tender legislation, and did indeed have some improvements. And they're also, the people in Turin are also part of a network of universities for sustainable development. So that was diffusing best practice, certainly around Italian universities, but I think also to universities in other countries. Next slide, please. So Now, almost all the countries covered in the book are in the European Union, with the exception of the United Kingdom, which of course was in the European Union until a few years ago, and then Russia is covered in the chapter in chapter 4, mentioned in chapter 4, and Brazil has a chapter to itself. So European law and food procurement has been a very big influence on what public authorities can do, and historically it's tended to push to widen competition and make it more difficult to source local food. But recently there's been a debate in the European Union about making public food procurement more sustainable. And I think exactly how this debate is going to turn out at the moment is not clear. So, watch the space for the farm to fork strategy and what happens to it. Next slide, please. So the book includes a series of national overviews. Some countries with a very strong commitment to sustainable food procurement. France, there's this law which mandates a certain percentage of organic and local food. Brazil, other countries, Spain, much more tentative support for sustainable food procurement. The UK, a very checkered history of school food with a series of drastic policy changes. In some years, the government has been trying to improve the quality and put in more resources. In other years, the reverse. Next slide, please. I'm just now I was asked to talk a bit more about chapter 3, which of course relates to the topic of my PhD thesis. And there you're comparing the UK, Denmark, and Sweden. And you might think that Denmark and Sweden are very similar, and they are similar in some ways, like being very strong in organic food. But in other ways, Denmark and Sweden are very different. And they're both very different from the UK. But anyway, if you just go on to the next slide, the meal systems in the three countries are all rather different. A massive public meal system in Sweden, very largely controlled by local authorities. In Denmark, by comparison, a much smaller public meal system with not very much school food at all, and not at all, much less public spending. Much the parents have to pay for it. And with the UK, a sort of rather mixed picture. There's a big school meal system, but the only certain categories of people get free school food. And then if you go on to the next slide, the procurement arrangements are very, very different in the three countries. Sweden, very, very decentralized. So that, of course, favors purchasing local food. Denmark, by contrast, very centralized with a single national contract. And the UK, a tendency to have large regional and sub-regional contracts, although it's more complicated than that because there's a lot of outsourcing of schools to private catering companies as well. So next slide. However, in all three countries, the same practices can be found, which have been used to encourage local procurement. And they're listed there: scratch cooking, seasonal menus, supplier engagement. You go and talk to your suppliers. Disaggregation of demand. You break up your demand so that rather than ask a small supplier to supply enough food for 400 schools, you ask them, can they supply enough food for 2 schools? And there's a fancy bit of software called dynamic food procurement, which can actually automate that process. And it's very important if you're trying to encourage small suppliers to provide some form of logistical solution so that a single small food company doesn't have to supply, actually cart round its product to 2 or 3 or 400 schools. And there are ways of doing that. Next slide. So just to wind up, national differences are very important. And you know, each country, you could write a separate history of the public meal system. But it's possible to analyze different countries using a similar framework. Now, if you look at chapter 4, where Urszula will be speaking in a minute, there a similar framework is used to analyze the 5 Baltic countries. And then chapter 10, written by Maurizio, shows how you can measure sustainability and social impacts. And there's a comparison between a different set of 5 countries. So I think next slide. Right, well, that's me. And I'll answer any, you can note my email address down. I'll respond to any queries by email, or you can ask, or I'll respond at the end of the webinar if you put a question into the chat. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Urszula?
Yes, hello everyone. Give me 1 second to start the slides. And share it with you.
Just make one more remark while we're waiting. For more extensive bios on today's panelists, Rosita has kindly put a link in the chat for those of you who haven't already looked at their bios on the registration website and are interested in learning more about folks who are speaking today. And Rosita just reposted the bios as well. Over to you, Urszula.
Great, thank you very much. So my name is Urszula Ala-Karvia. I'm a doctoral researcher at the Ruralia Institute, University of Helsinki. And I'm delighted because all 3 authors of the chapter 4 are actually here present, but I got this pleasure to introduce the chapter for you. We talk about the Baltic Sea region and the analysis of issues and challenges towards sustainable public food systems. So in a super quick brief, the 5 Baltic Sea region countries that were mentioned well compared, and nicely, thank you, Mark, for the introduction. We tried to put a framework to that analysis. We looked at the scope, financial arrangements, the quality standards, if existing, then organization of the public catering, in particular school meals, as well as at least 1 site visit to a public kitchen was described, and then also issues and problems. As a somewhat of a summary, it was there's this notion that the volume and mode of meal preparation had important implications on for sustainability. Now, our data, so this is the Baltic Sea region. Our data is based on 2 international projects, highly financed by European Union through the Interreg Baltic Sea program. In the first, we called the StratKit 1 project. It ran from 2019, then it was heavily disturbed by COVID up to 2021. And the countries, you can see that the number in the countries, so Finland had 2 partners, Russia had 2 partners from St. Petersburg, Estonia 4. So those highlighted countries are partners of StratKit, the first project. After that, we got an extension project that we got more countries, Sweden, Latvia, and Lithuania. So, and we, of course, for obvious reason, we didn't have Russia anymore in the partnership, as it cannot receive any more EU financing. So we continued the program. We continued the working on the sustainable public meal toolkits, and in that bio file that you got the link, there is a link to that, and I highly encourage you. There is 70 different tools from the Baltic Sea countries that maybe will be useful. But getting back to the chapter, those 5 countries are then described, and because I have only exactly 7 minutes left, I will only talk about 2 of the countries, and also in quite a short summary. So the Finnish study case was divided so that first we introduced the system in a school meal system in Finland, and similar to Sweden, in Finland, the school meal is for free. It's been the first country in the world who introduced free school meals. So it's the meals are well grounded in the legislation, and similarly to Sweden, the responsibility is at municipal level. There is a strong, the meals must comply with national nutrition recommendations based on the Nordic nutrition recommendations, maybe known to some of you. At the municipal level, at the same time, there is ongoing strong debate on different sustainability policies. So the key, of course, in the recent years, they've been, of course, introducing or promoting organic food, local food, increased vegetarian meals, decreased consumption of milk and meat. Okay. How it's organized, the school meal. So most typically, well, there are two possibilities: in-house provision or contract catering. And recently, large municipal catering organizations have often been reorganized as municipal-owned catering companies. And such companies are given a lot of also power and a lot of resources to operate in a rather big region, like areas. And the large central kitchens cook daily meals from around several hundreds to several thousands. And here one notion that Finland is a relatively small country of population 5.5 million citizens. But nonetheless, for us, it's a large central kitchens. And these kitchens often deploy cook and chill, and then the food is transported and reheated in the small kitchens nearby, or smaller kitchens will still use cook and serve mode for freshly delivered meals. And then we had that there are actually 3 different site visits described in the book, but in here I just wanted to give example of one, so-called food factory in the Finnish scale, rather big, from Helsinki, so from the capital region, producing 20,000 meals per day, exactly with cook and chill mode, serving about 80 catering sites. So in that sense, the logistics are very important as well. 2 daily meal options are offered, one vegetarian and one conventional. And what was important was a 5 weeks rotating menu. And this was the rotation that allowed precise annual estimates of food volumes and costs. And high interest, of course, in organic fairly trade products, as well as domestic fish and legumes. What were the problems and the challenges? Well, first of all, even though nutrition recommendations push for more vegetables, and even though the food culture is clearly changing, the consumer demand still supports highly meat and dairy. And as it was quite mentioned by Mark as a general example, that the scale and efficiency of that particular food factory was built upon availability of large volumes of uniform quality ingredients. Thus, it was difficult to include local small producers as suppliers in the tender. And there's ongoing effort to persuade cooks that organic food is of superior quality comparing to the higher costs. Yes. And also in this particular case, where this this canteen was located, sorry, not canteen, but the kitchen, there's a big production companies of milk, of dairy products and meat. So it kind of felt in contrast with the regional strategy to actually avoid dairy and milk. That was recognized as the problem. Okay, time is running up, so super quickly towards Poland. So much bigger countries, right? Almost 40 million people and a strong agriculture country. So only from September 2022, the primary schools have a obligation to provide meals to students. However, the meals are not for free. Participation in dining is voluntary and partially subsidized by the city in a way that it is the parents who pay for the ingredients used, and then the municipality gives, let's say, staff and working space. So the Poland is in-house catering is still the most popular way. So schools have their own employees and the meals are cooked on sites. So the schools are then equipped with kitchens that nowadays tends to be also very small. So there are limits of expansion and testing new cooking methods, for example. However, schools and nurseries, they do employ catering managers, so a person like also responsible for designing meals and developing menus and caring for the nutritional recommendations. So comparing to Finland, a lot of responsibilities is actually on the school itself, not as much as on municipality. Did it change? No, it didn't change the slide, sorry. Site visits, we visited couple school canteens belonging to municipality of Rybnik in the south of Poland, where they were part of our project that I mentioned. So they already were triggered to test something new. So, for example, they implemented Nordic examples from the project, quite simple issues like introducing a food buffet to not only interest kids in deciding what they want to eat and learning about vitamins, but also to reduce food waste. As well as, for example, waterless cleaning tool was tested in that kitchen. But it was, there are more examples also in the chapter. Quickly going to the end. In Poland, in those particular case studies, definitely the problem was the lack of training of the staff in the sustainability issues. And due to their relatively long careers, they seem to be a bit resistant and unwilling to experiment something new with food. At the same time, being rather segregated from the pupils, and I mean like this physically segregated by walls, like being in a canteen, being segregated, it meant that employees might feel a bit underestimated and disrespected, for example, by high level of food waste. And the last point was that, investment in the school canteen at the school level were often given low priority. So mostly because of high cost and limited space. Super fast. I'm sorry, I'm a bit extending my time. So, I mean, there was, we had also Russian study, and you can kind of lesson learn was that the EU countries, Denmark, Estonia, Finland, Poland, even though there are big differences in the state of development in sustainable practices, they are anyway a very different class. And I mean, they're anyway talking about the sustainability, while for the Russian St. Petersburg, very often there was no policy orientation in that sphere whatsoever. This is just super fast. And thank you very much. And just a quick map of Finland and the advertisement of Ruralia Institute as a part of the Faculty of Agriculture and Forestry. Thank you, and sorry for taking a bit longer time.
No problem. Thank you. Maurizio?
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Rosita, for inviting me this very nice talk. My name is Maurizio Mariani. I'm the director of the Eating City International Platform, and I'm also one of the co-writers of this book. And especially today, I will introduce the chapter 14, the so-called needed shift of paradigm. Why we need to talk about a shift of paradigm? I mean, in the last 20 years, 30 years mainly, our food service system is driven by environmental degradation, health concern, and too much industrialization. Public procurement of food, particularly in school canteen, hospital, and nursing homes, is a strategic sector that can be used to spread sustainable practice. And by focusing on public food service, we can address health, ethical, and environmental issue in a significant market segment. We have to remember that in Europe, the public procurement is around 15% of the gross of the GDP, and I mean it's taxpayer money, it's public spending, and every local authority has a strong responsibility in changing this paradigm. Our food system faces critical challenges, including climate change, biodiversity loss, food insecurity. The industrial model of food exacerbates this issue, leading to environmental degradation and public health crisis. Try to understand the context of our food chain worldwide, I should say, because it's not so different at the end. After the Second World War, the use of chemical, shifting from using for the war and start to use quite a lot of chemical in agriculture, has made really a large industrialization. We'll see later the last 20 years in the Italian market how much was industrialized the sector of public food service, monoculture practice, and really too much chemical inputs. Over the time, this practice have led to environmental degradation, biodiversity loss, and health issue stemming from poor nutrition. Today, and we see we rise obesity, diabetes, and cancer. I mean, we have so many scientific evidence that our daily food is really creating a lot of problem. We replace the real food by processed food, hyper-processed food sometimes. And there is a lot of, we use too much of this processed food or ultra-processed food in public catering, public food service, due to also a budgeting problem everywhere. Every city is facing budget cuts. But this rise of ultra-processed food is increasingly linked to diet-related disease, such as obesity, diabetes, and cancer. So really, especially in public food service for school canteen, we have a huge potential to counter this trend by offering a healthy alternative. And I'm not talking about only organic food, for example. Sustainability in public food service is not only using good ingredients. Replacing ultra-processed snacks or food with real food, whole food, can improve public health outcomes. Today, all the health system in Europe are facing a growing trend of per capita expense, and also we will see later in some graphs. The school should become not only a food provider for canteen, I mean, not only feeding our children, but should be an educational space where food literacy, that is one of the key words, for the future, and health are taught and prioritized. I want to show this because I was a few months ago teaching in China, in Lanzhou University, about geopolitical impact of public procurement, of food public procurement. And that's what's happened also in Europe or in US from the early 1970s. In terms of the availability of money to spend for each people living in China is growing a lot. You can see in the first graph money to spend, and how the eating habits are changing in the same period. You can see the vegetable oil and especially in rural consumption area. You can see the meat consumption from 25 to more than 40 kilo per capita per year, eggs, and reduction of utilization and eating of grains. Same time, we are facing everywhere worldwide and in China more than many other countries, because we have to forget that China, it's the number of Chinese people impact a lot, much more than the US and the European market together. So you can see that in the United States now, the growing of obesity is stable. I mean, it's start to be managed, but in China is exploding completely. And that is causing deforestation in Brazil, but we can relate the import of red meat from China, from Brazil, and the deforestation. So we need really to shift our eating habits. But what's the public food services in Europe is around 90 million meals daily in between private and public sector. Around half of these is served in public canteen. There should be the municipality canteen or the school canteen or hospital or elderly house. In the chapter, we showcase the Dordogne department in France that has created a really sustainable, inclusive, and healthy system for the school. The department is managing around 35 canteens. Of course, Dordogne is a region, is a department, is one of the poorest departments of France, but is with a lot of agriculture. So they really try to connect, and they were successfully on this, connect the needs of the nutritional needs of the pupils in the school with the farm, with the land, with the production in agriculture. And then the cooks and chefs were really trained again to transform raw goods, local, organic ingredient into delicious meal. We have not to forget that we need someone that is able to transform ingredients and to transform good ingredients into a delicious meal. Sustainability, I want to underline, is not only buying local or organic product. It seems also to transform this product into meals in a sustainable way, not using a lot of energy, not using a lot of water, etc., etc. But let's see what's happened in, is not the last 20 years, because from 96 to 2015, this is a research we made analyzing some thousand of balance sheet of financial statement of company in Italy, like 80% of the Italian market for public food service, and sample of their supplier, typical supplier from meat, cheese, dairy, legumes, all the ingredients, and the so-called middleman, the logistic platform that is now allowing us to have like cherry tomato every day of the year, and buy off-season product, because that's the system, the sick system, as I call, of today. And we can see the first graph, the food and beverage manufacturing revenue per worker. This is a productivity ratio. Is shift from a little bit more than 200,000 euro to more than 600,000 euro. So we invest a lot in automation, and we reduce the work behind the canteen. But let's see what's happened in the so-called middleman, so the food and beverage wholesale, that they only add a quote of service. They have a big catalog. They can provide us any day of the year the cherry tomato or the strawberry or any kind of ingredients we want worldwide. And that's also from 1 million euro revenue per worker. It's like 50% more today. And, oh, sorry. And in the 3 sample we analyze, the social food service company, the food manufacturer, and the food and beverage wholesalers, the so-called middlemen, you can see that the manufacturer, they lost in terms of EBIT, earning before incoming tax, from 6% to 2% in 20 years. The public food service company, the social food service company, as Sodexo or Compass, I mean, the big company, also the medium one in Italy, they rise from 6 to 2% of profit. And the winner of this game, of this industrialization process, is the middleman, who is not adding any value to the single product, only a service to deliver, of course, and this is very important, I can understand, but, and if we can compare, there is no a relation cause-effect, this is sure, but I mean, it's a provocation. Look at the same period, 96-2015, the per capita expenditure on health in the Eurozone or OECD. We shift, for example, in Italy from 1,277 euro per capita to 2,437. I mean, it's like the double. That is the public expenditure on health. And if we go to see into the details of this expenditure, we understand that a big part of this is caused by our nutrition. Our sedentarity, I should say, also is not only related to food, but of course, there is some connection. Importance of food education in school. This also a few months ago, Carmen Petrini from the Food Movement has launched a huge petition to the Italian government to really put education, food education, food literacy. It's so important that our pupils from the very first age, they start to understand what there is behind the food they eat, what also the importance of whole food and reducing ultra-processed consumption can foster a generation that values sustainable eating habits, mitigation the future burden of diet-related disease, because it's a huge problem we are facing already, and we have to face in the years to come. In the frame of a School Food for Change project that we are, it's one of the maybe the biggest European funded project for school canteen by the European Commission. We create this concept of the whole school food approach. That is an holistic concept that offers pupils and students healthier and more sustainable food choice in long term. It's not just about what food they are serving in school, but also about where the food comes from and our production impact on our environment and our health. Putting this whole school food approach into practice requires a teamwork from school staff, cooks, school children, and all the other stakeholders. We can say a kind of food community around the school. To end my intervention, I already talked about the power of public procurement to achieve sustainable goal. In Europe now, we assist to a downsizing of the project of the green transition and the farm to fork. So we will see the new commission what will propose, but from what we see in the last few days, it's not really the best. But anyhow, it's emphasizing, I mean, the circular food system approach. That's also the systemic vision of the public food service is so important, and that's through this book, through this chapter, and also the one of metrics, we try to explain to local authority how they can manage this circular food system approach, emphasizing reduce, reuse, recycle, packaging, for example, that is very important, sustainable farming practice and plant-based diet, promoting equity and just food system. The concept of the kitchen food hub that is described also in the chapter offers a scalable solution for urban area. These hubs aggregate, process, and distribute local fresh ingredients. A kitchen that is producing 20,000 or 30,000 or 50,000, there is sometimes, meal per day cannot allow small producer to be on the game. We need to reduce the size of the kitchen to 5,000, 8,000 meal per day maximum in order to allow small producers, small farmers, small fishermen to be able to be part of this game, to be part of the tender and to participate at the tender. We know in Europe especially, there was also the report from the Commission, from the Court of, that is checking the work of the Commission, that was saying too many small companies are out of the game of the public tender. We need to facilitate the participation. Also, not only for bureaucratic problem, but to really reduce the size of the lots. So, in order to allow them to become a supplier. In conclusion, to address the challenge posed by the current food system, a paradigm shift is necessary. As I told before, the paradigm shift for me is not only the way we buy with the tender specification, organic food, fair trade food, CO2 emission related to the service, energy consumption. We need also to re-evaluate the people working in canteen and evaluate the social service they are done to our community. Chefs must be trained on working with fresh ingredients, with raw ingredients. We need investments in kitchen, because to produce, starting from pre-processed food is something, and to produce starting from raw ingredients, we need completely different equipment and savoir-faire and knowledge from the chefs. Today, many chefs don't want anymore to work in canteen, in public food service, because they assemble food. The chefs, the cookers are trained to prepare delicious meal starting from raw ingredients. So that's, I like to finish with a citation from Jean-Antoine Brillat-Savarin. The destiny of nation depends on how they nourish themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Maurizio. So now we're going to shift gears and dive deeper into some of the key insights from our panelists. This next section will focus on two important questions that get to the heart of sustainable food procurement and its potential impact on policy. And the first question I want to propose is, what have you learned about food procurement in writing this book that would inform city, state, and national policies in the years to come? And I want to start with a response from Mina. So Mina, I'll turn it over to you.
Can you hear me? My first question? Yes, you can. All right. So first of all, I think this public procurement and catering system is such a rich empirical theater. So much is happening at once, and so many phenomena depend on each other. So for instance, if we think about the school kids, the pupils, whether they like the food or not is crucial, because you cannot force them to eat something they don't like. This is really a challenge for chefs. Then again, let's say nutritional recommendations. In some countries, they are highly rigid, like, let's say, in Finland and many Nordic countries. Then again, there are countries where these are not rigid. So there's much more room for, let's say, maneuver within the kitchen regarding ingredients and composition of meals, etc. Then again, there are my educational aspects. As Urszula mentioned, in Poland, these, let's say, procurement and catering persons may not be that, how would I say, respected as professionals. Then again, in other countries, like I think in Finland and Sweden as well, they are municipal servants, public servants with nice positions and nice salaries. So they have a very stable, let's say, career path. And the bigger kitchens, they are supervising in a way, the better, you know, so there's professional progress for them. Then again, they also have quite rigid educational demands. Not just anybody can work there, you know. It kind of also, let's say, it profiles the profession in a certain way. Then again, you have the municipalities. There are big municipalities, as Urszula was describing, our one case, something like 330,000 people, or nearby Helsinki, something like 500,000 people. So efficient and effective industrial process is the only way to have very low costs, as you, Maurizio, told us. So this scale of activities is quite different when you compare a little rural municipality with a school with, let's say, 100 pupils. So that is kind of manageable as a small unit. But think about these tens of thousands of meals per day. So if you have even, let's say, imagine you have falafel or meatballs, who is going to bake those falafel balls or meatballs if you need thousands of them? So industry is the only solution. I mean, in big cities, I would be highly interested to know how New York handles this issue, because in big cities you have such a population density that most schools and nursing homes, etc., they are quite big. So therefore, yeah, you need to have the preparation mode and the size of your customer base matched together in a way the municipality can pay for the costs. So I mean, there are so many moving, even moving targets, how to organize things, and then the whole administrational process seems very different. In small municipalities, there's much more freedom to organize things differently. But if you have an expensive, let's say, food factory, it tens of millions of euro it may cost, so you don't do these municipal decisions very, how would I say, flexibly. Once they are done, you're stuck with it in a way. So I mean, the room for maneuver is so different in different situations, and therefore each case is kind of unique, and you need unique solutions with people who are motivated to have a change towards sustainability. So it's really sort of a complex and rich terrain. That's what I think I learned.
If you could think about a discrete situation or discrete scenario in a particular country as part of the process of writing for this book, where you saw something that clearly stood out to you and you felt like was something that could, if an issue or an opportunity, if elevated, to the level of policymakers, could inform policy at the local, state, or governmental level. Was there something like that that popped out to you, or is it the case that it's so multifaceted, so complex that it's really, as you said, a moving target, and it's not one thing that jumped out to you, but the complexity of the entire procurement process is what stood out to you?
So are you asking me about what kind of policies I would suggest?
Sure, based on the information that you were able to identify as sort of writing for this book, is there something that stood out to you that would inform a policy recommendation?
Well, I think that the first thing would be to have policymakers interested in this field, because there are many municipalities or institutions for which nutrition and public meals is kind of a sidekick, whereas for us it's a very important part of sustainability, a sustainable food system. So I think we need to have these people motivated for change, and then they need to study their own case and see what they can do, because there are multiple things one can do depending on your, let's say, depending on the size of your activities, your client base, etc. So very many things can be done, but always suited to the particular case.
And Mark, I want to ask you a similar question. As part of your investigations for this work, are there things that stood out to you that were clearly bits of evidence or information that you'd come across that you were aware of before, that you thought this was more widely known by policymakers, this can have an enormous impact on informing how procurement policy is shaped?
Sorry, ask me that question again.
I'm wondering if there's information that you came across in the process of writing this book that you thought would be strong evidence that would inform policymakers' decisions when it comes to procurement?
Now, right, I'm struggling to answer that question because there's just so much content in the book. I'll give you one quote, which is this was like a gentleman running a private sector catering company in the UK, who said that the absence of any enforcement of the national standards on school food quality had led to a race to the bottom, in the sense that whoever was trying to provide quality school food in England was being undercut by people who were offering to provide it somewhat cheaper. So I mean that I think was, is an illustration of how a particular public policy or absence of public policy, not in having school food quality standards in England, but not enforcing them in any way, can have a detrimental effect. That's one thing which is referred to in the first chapter on school food quality standards in England. Is this an example of the sort of thing that you're looking for?
I mean, I think quality and the conflict between that and cost, is one that resonates across procurement issues. In New York State, we have something called the lowest responsible bidder. And when it comes to vendors who are looking to do business with municipalities, the lowest responsible bidder really has historically been the most important indicator as to whether a contract will be successful. And one of the things that people in New York who've been concerned with bringing values-based procurement to municipal procurement is that lowest responsible bidder just means a race to the bottom, as opposed to balancing out all of these different concerns, whether they be related to labor, food quality, environmental impact, etc. Those should be equally, and in some cases elevated above lowest responsible bidder if we want to be responsible in the way in which we procure food. And Urszula, I'm curious, have you come across any issues related to food quality and how that impacts in your research for this book? Or were there other issues that were elevated in your mind that you think policymakers would find useful if they just knew more about them?
Yes. So my answer is definitely through kind of our project. So our work was not, let's say, pure research, but we had that founder. We had the idea to check what's the situation in the Baltic Sea region. So what's the program that financed us was interested, of course, to compare the states, the Baltic Sea states, so to compare the countries, and of course to learn one from another. And I think we can say that we definitely succeed, because the countries who were clearly undeveloped, like Poland, like Russia, Estonia to some extent, they gained a lot. Those policymakers who got translated to the national language tools, they got, you know, examples from Denmark, who, like city of Copenhagen, having back then around 85% of organic ingredients at schools, right? Now I think it's even higher, and Finland. So for us, we saw that there is such an inequality in our region, which is not really big, and majority of countries were in EU. So there's such a different level of development. So there was a relatively little we could really offer to Denmark or to Finnish policymakers. So let's say our research helped those less developed, and by this good practice examples, of course, they required some kind of not only verbal language translation, but also kind of translating to their setting, right? Like, is this even possible to have example of local or organic food? So it is, I would say that our research definitely helped the quality of public procurement. For example, in Poland, we had a very active, our partner was a municipality. So they were the right people to get our knowledge, and they were kind of trained by us, by our dialogue, by our discussions. Definitely study visits were super important. What Minna said, like they were interested. So first of all, the policymakers were interested. Our project gave them financing, because without our project, even though they were interested, but they didn't have funding to work on the subject. So thanks to external EU funding, matching their high interest and getting ready examples from Finland, from Denmark, and later on from Sweden and such, we have made a real change in that particular municipality in Poland. But so, yeah, external funding and external support for us worked that direction. What, for example, Finnish municipalities gained from our work, of course, we did hope, and we wanted to, we worked with them, and it was more like within Finland, within municipalities, kind of exchange of practices and testing. And I think, yeah, there were examples, for example, of dropping trays from the line of serving. So the pupils no longer have a tray, they have on a plate and a glass. So this kind of, we were transferring good practices between the municipalities as a ready-made kind of product. And these kind of tools, and we call them tools, like so the sustainability toolkits. So we have 70 tools like that they are exactly as a result of the project. That's really as a result of the book, but the book is result of the project. So yeah, so we have exactly practical tools listed in the Sustainable Public Meal Toolkit. That link has been given.
Thank you. And Maurizio, I'm wondering, part of your work on this book, are there practical recommendations that you think policymakers would find useful in terms of the information that you discovered as part of this process?
Yeah, first, I think that we need to understand that, I mean, reading the book and reading all the chapter and also working at international level, I must affirm that the diversity of each region, but not only each region of Europe, each region of the world. I must assume something very important, because Minna was talking about New York. New York is like 1 million meal per day. In Europe, we have no one city producing more than 150,000 meal per day, and almost 120, like Paris, Milan is 90,000 meal per day. So the size, the scale is much different. Beijing, for example, in China is 1.2 million meal per day. So we need to understand that the world is so diverse that we need to have different recipe for each continent. That's, I remember, years ago, like maybe 15 years ago, with Sustainable Food Lab, with Hamilton and other American friends, we were talking about the metric system, and we say we cannot have a standardized metric system. It's impossible. We need to recognize that food is diversity, and this diversity is the richness of our system. We have not to destroy. We have not to. I mean, we have to decommodify the system as more a common goods than a commodity. I should say that some suggestion yesterday, 23 chefs from 18 European cities gathered here in Turin in the frame of School Food for Change project, and we are training them in using, in working on plant-based diet and using raw ingredients to transform and so get new recipe, because this is also the other problem. I come from private sector, so I was managing a large food service company in my life for many years. I was managing the Fiat canteen with 20,000 meals per day in '94. And also, I mean, the company was providing food all the School of Turin, 35,000 meals per day in the same time, in '94, '96. And I remember very well the transformation of the system from kitchen inside the school to centralized kitchen. That was a big mistake. That's the biggest mistake that our politicians do, because we need to go back to have almost where we can school inside the kitchen, or small centralized kitchen. We call them kitchen food hub in the book, that can allow small producer to serve and to supply fresh food. We need to train chefs. So really, there is no one unique recipe. There is different recipe for each region, recognizing and giving value to the diversity. But we have not to forget the human labor is at the center of this delicious revolution, as I like to say.
Thank you. In the interest of time, I think we'll move on to the Q&A portion of today's panel. Again, I want to encourage all the attendees who have questions to put them in the chat, and I'll be happy to, as time permits, relay them to the panelists. And the first question that we have is from the director of our institute, Nevin Cohn. And Nevin says, as Maurizio mentioned, one of the most direct ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from school food is to shift to plant-based proteins, but livestock farmers feel disadvantaged. Is this a conflict in the cities you've explored? And if so, how has it been resolved? So would anyone like to take a chance at answering that question?
I hope Maurizio will. I felt this was for him a question.
I mean, I need to think more broadly, the conflict between,
Right.
you know, environmental protocols being put in place and traditional or conventional farming more broadly. So, Maurizio, what are your thoughts?
I'm not an expert in agriculture, but I should say that on the metrics we use to evaluate sustainability along the chain, the CO2 emission is not really the best metrics we can use, because on this, for example, industrial farming is gaining some time against organic farming, because it's less producing for hectare of land or land use. So we need really to create a new metrics. In the book chapter is number 10, if I remember. Yes. We talk about the social return of investment indicator, the local multiplier indicator. We talk a lot about the water and the carbon footprint. So the carbon footprint is expressed in CO2 equivalent per kilogram of goods. But really pay attention, the use of the life cycle analysis that is creating and allowing us to calculate the CO2 emission. We need to establish the right boundaries of the analysis, because otherwise we can keep, apple for pear, as we say. So it's very important something is sure, is the loss of biodiversity. The loss of biodiversity is due to the huge amount of chemical input that we have. After I'm not really the first person in the world that in favor of only of organic agriculture. We have a lot of system that can be also useful with small chemical input, but we need sure to reduce the input, the chemical input, because we are destroying, and we today face the problem of fertility of soil quite everywhere.
Thank you. And I'm wondering if any of the other panelists have experienced that conflict between agricultural interests and the need to expand environmental protection protocols. If so, have you seen any path forward for resolving these sorts of conflicts? So has anyone else seen anything similar like that as part of their engagement in procurement work?
Well, I would say the expansion of organic agriculture in Sweden and Denmark has positive environmental benefits, reduction in pollution, improvement in biodiversity, and that if you only buy organic beef for your public kitchens, then the quantities that you buy will be less than if you're buying conventional beef, but you're buying a very high quality product. And what you then have to do is you have to rethink your cooking practices so that you are doing meals which have rather less beef in them, but which you mix that with a lot of lentils and chickpeas and other ingredients. And a phrase which is sometimes used is less meat but better meat.
If I can add.
Yeah, well, I agree, Mark. Yeah, less but better in general. So if you look at how obese, or let's say overweight, people are today, so it's not just what they eat, but also how they move. So I think we need some more training. And well, yeah, that's another issue. But I mean, if food is delicious, as you were talking, particularly in Italy about this, people feel kind of deeper satisfaction from the food, and therefore they don't need to eat that much. In a way, they have a sense of well-being after a proper-sized meal if the food is tasty and good. It's kind of a joy of the goodness of food, and that is something I think we would need to bring to all people. To if you think about children in the school, so there are many children who, at least in Finland, I think, do not have such let's say well composed and tasty meals at home. So if we have in Finland kind of 5-week rotating menu, who prepares at home so many different kinds of meals? If you can have chicken, you can have pork sometimes, and even beef, and salmon, and fungi, and vegetables, and berries, and so many different kinds of food, soups and casseroles, and piecemeal finger food even. So if all this would be good, it really helps parents because they can always rely on the quality of food at school and that their kids are eating it. Instead of having bad food, kids don't eat it, and then you have food waste. So this goodness of food is an important aspect, and I think the organic one is really preferable. But if you think about the farmer, he needs some scale in his operations to get a decent income, and the processors the same. Therefore, typically in a little country, not by area, but by population here in Finland. So the companies are not that many, and they do not process very many kinds of food. So therefore, we have one big company for milk and a couple of smaller ones. And I think the same is in Norway. They have Tine. The same is in Denmark and Arla, and Sweden too, Arla. So these big companies are able to produce massive volumes of organic milk, for instance. And therefore, this organic milk is available in the whole country. And I think in Finland, many schools offer organic milk, particularly. And you can also have organic butter. It's more expensive, not that much used. Organic yogurts. But let's say the matching of farmers' operations and income with the scale of processing and with these wholesalers you were complaining about their profits. And I do agree, wholesalers are a big knot in this food chain. But if there could be some, well, there are smaller wholesalers who are not that expensive and more local, they should have more kind of leverage in their operations. But anyway, organic food, which is also good for agriculture and biodiversity, should really be expanded, but it's the easiest way to expand it by those food items which have suitable scale in production.
And yet there are countries like Poland that in public procurement, the only requirement I mean, it's a price. It's all about the price, and the cheaper product wins. So whatever we tried hard and whatever school or municipality even want to have organic products, and they have organic farming, if the organic products are not cheap enough, they by law cannot be selected. So there is, and Poland is a part of EU. So there is, on one hand, there is this demand on increased organic food at schools and public meals in general, but country-wise, there are also such obstacles.
They are developing, I think, Urszula, in Poland too. So organic is expanding. Sometimes it's very slow process. Sometimes it goes faster. But the market is needed, and the market must be there, which means people need to buy those foods. It depends actually very much on consumers and farmers risking the new methods of production. And that is one key issue. So farmers need to learn to produce organic food. But what about, Mark, the news in
sorry,
UK?
Maurizio has right hand, so some time ago.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, thank you. No, I just want to puntualize something. I mean, organic, it's a certification at the end. I mean, I was many years ago part of these movements that was created with IAB in Italy, the Italian Association of Organic Agriculture. But all the founder, I should say, of organic agriculture system in Europe now, we are thinking that is not anymore enough. Because for me, I will always prefer to have my local sappier, not organic, with few regenerative agriculture, let me say, than to have my apple coming from South America, as it was in Turin many years ago, because I mean, I have still the copy of the invoice. And it's incredible because nearby Turin, we have a very good production of apple, for example. But this is the sick system that is not related only to the public food service. It's the World Organization, World Trade Organization. I mean, it's the freedom to sell everywhere. But local and public institution has the power to shift this paradigm. And to shift this paradigm, we need to be also I mean, concrete and pragmatic. We cannot solve the problem with organic agriculture. It's impossible. It's more expensive many times. We need to find a balance, a right balance between local with regenerative agriculture of less chemical input. If you make the LCA of 1 meal, you will understand that the main problem we have is the animal protein. If we reduce the consumption, the use of animal protein, we already shift the paradigm, because 1 meal, conventional meal in school, made with animal protein is no less than 4 kilograms of CO2 equivalent. A vegetarian meal is less than 1 kilogram. We have studies all over the world showing this. So the main problem is the animal protein-based system, more than organic or not organic. Don't forget that the other big problem we are facing is logistics, is food miles. If we continue to import out of season product from the other part of the world, it's a huge problem nowadays. So as I said before, there is no one recipe to solve the problem. I mean, sometimes I'm talking with mayor, with delegates of city all over the world, and they say, but what's the recipe? There is no one perfect recipe, but we should rethink the system at local level, acting local, thinking global. Thank you.
Thank you. And in the interest of time, I'm going to move on to another question from the audience. This question is from Narayan, and it's for Urszula. And Narayan provided some context and says, I'm a researcher focusing in on Northern Canadian sustainable food systems. Communities living here are mostly Indigenous. So when we talk about sustainable food systems in the North, they utilize a lot of traditional foods, moose, caribou, etc. The question is, when working in rural Finland, are there sustainability concerns working with Indigenous people? Oh, sorry, with Indigenous diets. For example, the balance between meat's role in driving climate change and versus the traditional role of meat for the Indigenous people of Finland.
Thank you for the question, and definitely Minna can chip into the answer as well. I would say that the only people, the real Indigenous people of Finland, are Sami people who are living far north in Lapland. They are indeed they have a very strong recognition of their own culture, their own language, and in there the reindeer meat and reindeer husbandry is like the main agriculture, because I mean it's, even though the reindeer is free, but the reindeer does belong. So I mean it is cultivated, let's say, animal. Yes, sorry. We are more working, let's say, in the that the book and the work was done in cities, in the cities of southern Finland or mid Finland. So we are far away from the north that would answer that particular question. And we talk about a really small population, like couple of thousands, dozens of thousand people, no more than that. I would only assume that they have their own traditional meals. But I mean, in the school of Finland, in typical Finnish school, there are, of course, Finnish products, Finnish milk. But there can be game meat from New Zealand. So it is still possible to really, even thinking that, okay, game meat is somehow traditional for Finland, but that not necessarily comes from Finland. That has been a case, but this is of course trying to be forgotten. Fish, so the local fish, or let's say the Finnish fish, is lake, and I would say quite a big debate of how rich and how rich in ingredient is the sweet lake fish, that and how little CO2 and emission and so on in this fish has. However, it is not easy, like it was said by Minna and all, to actually convince the kids to eat those products from that particular fish because it has a strong taste. So we have a lot, or we know many examples in theory but they're not necessarily working in practice. Minna, would you like to add something?
Yeah, well, I think it was point on what you said, but basically, I think I like a kind of food model which might be called adaptive mosaic, which means that different regions have different strengths and different, let's say, geographical locations and climatic conditions for different kinds of basic products, primary products. And let's say in Norway, they have the Northern Atlantic Ocean, lots of fish coming there, and the same in Iceland. Well, we have some lakes, but technically it's difficult to draw fish from very shallow lakes. Therefore, there's also imported fish or cultivated fish in Finland to large extent. But also, often the more north you go, the more dependent basic food cultures are on meat, because meat takes you from summer and autumn over the winter to the next spring, when you can start to grow something. Therefore, those areas on our globe which are cultivable, one can cultivate across the year, and the temperatures are higher. They are more amenable to particular kinds of production. Let's say nuts, let's say many fruits, let's say many different fruits. And therefore, it's kind of adaptive mosaic to change your own kind of system towards a better one. Like somebody said, I think it was you, Maurizio, was it, or Mark? Less and better. Mark, you said it, less and better.
Yes, it's somebody else's idea.
Yeah. We are quoting, yeah, somebody, yeah.
I think I heard it first from Anja Hultberg from Copenhagen House of Food a long time ago.
Thank you, Mina. One more last remark, Mauricio, and then I will close things out if you have something to add.
Yeah, just one point out. The big enemy today to reduce obesity and cardiovascular disease is the use of sugar and salt. And that's also, it's a frame of school meal preparation. We can really avoid to use sugar and salt, using herbs and spicy to give taste to food, and using, for example, talking about meat, red meat, all the animal, and to use the lowest value part of the animal, the bones, to make chicken stock or beef stocks, to give taste to food, because of course children they prefer today the taste of meat than the taste of legumes or other veggie product. But we can also use some small astuce to give taste of any kind of legume with some spicy and with some beef stock, for example. And that's we already experience and is working. It's helping the transition versus a more plant-based diet.
Thank you. And with that, I think we can bring this book talk to a close. Thank you so much to our panelists for sharing their valuable insights today, and to everyone who joined this important discussion. It's clear that sustainable food procurement has the potential to drive significant change in our systems. Let's all continue to explore, advocate, and implement strategies that make food policies more equitable and improves the way in which procurement is done in our affected areas. Thank you again to all of our panelists. And for those of you in the audience, we hope to